This slide series is done in memory of Dr. Edward Ross Ritvo, who passed away in June of 2020 at the age of 90 years. A pioneer in autism research, he led the field in establishing that autism was neurobiologically based. A graduate of Harvard and a U.S. Army veteran, he spent his entire academic professional career at UCLA. His work included studies of diagnosis and classification, genetics and epidemiology, as well as neurobiology and psychopharmacology. He trained generations of leaders in the field and is survived by family members and many, many students. It's an honor to dedicate this series of talks to his memory with the support of Dr. Ariella Riva Ritvo Slifka and the Alan B. Slifka Foundation.
Hello, my name is Dr. Karen Meers. Today I will be presenting on prompting. This is part of the Professional Educator Training Series brought to you by Southern Connecticut State University's Center of Excellence on Autism Spectrum Disorders. Today I will describe prompts and tell you what they're used for. I will also identify the prompting hierarchy and prompt procedures. And finally, I'll explain how to develop an effective prompting implementation plan that you can use with your students with autism. Along the way through the presentation, you might see some terminology that you are unfamiliar with. I have listed some of those terms on these slides, and I plan to review them as we go along as they show up in the presentation. Take a look. Here's another slide. Prompting is an evidence-based practice. That means that prompting is supported by research, so it's a great methodology to use in your classroom to help students with autism learn. A prompt is a cue that is added to general instruction to encourage the use of a skill or lead a student to a correct answer. When you pair prompting with reinforcement, it's a very powerful tool for helping your students learn. And one important thing I'd like to point out is that independence is the goal. Although we're providing assistance to students through prompting, we want to make sure that we allow them to have as much independence as possible as they learn the skill. Prompting is important for students with autism spectrum disorders, and research shows that it's very helpful when it comes to learning. It helps students to facilitate correct responding, and it also helps them to build independence. It helps them to learn new skills, and it increases the rate at which they learn them. And finally, and very importantly, it helps students to reduce their frustration levels when they're trying to learn a complex skill. There are several types of prompts, but before I tell you about them, I want you to think about a skill that you maybe recently learned. And what tools and strategies did you use to master that skill? I know recently I had a new computer software system put in my work computer. I found it pretty difficult to learn. But in order to learn, I tried on my own, and that didn't work. And I realized, oh, I need a prompt. So I took a look at the written instructions. When the written instructions didn't get me too far, I decided I needed even more help. I needed to have a model or someone demonstrate it for me. So I asked a coworker to come across the hall into my office and show me how to use the system. And then I was able to feel more comfortable and navigate successfully through the software. You'll be using prompts with your students to help them navigate through their different difficulties in learning new skills. And here are some of the different types. I will explain each one briefly, and then in the following slides, I'll provide more detail and examples. A gesture is a nonverbal prompt. It's something like nodding or pointing the student toward an answer that we want them to get correct. There are also verbal prompts. There are direct prompts and indirect verbal prompts. So those are spoken words where you directly tell the student what to do to arrive at the correct answer, or maybe you provide a hint. There are also visual prompts. Visual prompts and object prompts provide information that lead a student towards performing the task correctly. There are also model prompts. That's the one that I really needed to help me get through my computer learning. So model is a demonstration. Finally, we have physical prompts. There are partial physical prompts, and there are full physical prompts. Partial physical prompts are a touch to show the correct response, and full physical prompts use full manual physical guidance to actually help a student perform the skill. I'm going to start off with gestural prompts here. Gestural prompts are nonverbal prompts. And it's important to remember that students with autism often have a difficult time understanding nonverbal prompts. So if you plan to use these type of prompts, please make sure that the student understands what the prompt means before you actually use it. Nonverbal prompts include facial expressions such as smiles or frowns, or even nodding your head, pointing, or reaching. An example of a nonverbal prompt would be if I said to a student, "Show me the color blue," and then I pointed at the blue object on the computer, as you can see in this picture. So that's using a gesture or nonverbal information to help a student arrive at the correct answer. Another type of prompt is a verbal prompt. That's when you use your verbal or vocal language to support instruction. There are direct spoken prompts and indirect spoken prompts. A direct verbal prompt tells a student exactly what is expected, such as, "Get your pencil, please." And then there are indirect verbal prompts, which you give part of the response to the student as a hint to help guide them in the right direction. For example, I can say, "What day follows Saturday?" And then I say, "Sun," hoping that the student will finish the sentence by saying Sunday. Visual prompts are an excellent way to prompt students with autism spectrum disorder. The reason why is a lot of students have major strength in visual processing and visual learning. So visuals are a great way to prompt students. Visuals can consist of objects or pictures. And as you can see by this example on the screen, there's a visual schedule. We have a great module on visual supports that I would love you to take a look at for more detail. But as you can see from this visual schedule, the student is guided to each activity in the morning and in the afternoon. And then an example of an object prompt would be me holding a puzzle box up and handing it to a student, hinting at them to put their puzzle pieces inside the box. So visuals can include drawings, flashcards, videos, photographs. There are a variety of visuals that you can use. The next type of prompt is modeling. And modeling is when you demonstrate a target skill. And you could also show the correct answer by modeling it or demonstrating it. For example, if I said to a student, "Clap your hands," I would follow up by clapping my hands to model or demonstrate the skill that I want to show them. So that's a great method of prompting as well. Physical prompting is when we actually use a physical touch to show a correct response. As you can see a picture here, there is an adult walking with a child across the street. Now, I would definitely use full physical guidance or holding the individual's hand while crossing the street before I let them just cross on their own. And then once a student becomes comfortable with me prompting them by holding their hand, I might loosen my grip and maybe touch their shoulder gently and guide them down the street safely. So physical prompts can be very helpful in different times. You might have noticed that some of the prompts require more assistance than others. And here we have a picture of the prompting hierarchy, which shows that some prompts are less restrictive than others. For example, a gesture is much less restrictive than physically providing hand-over-hand guidance to a student. And this prompting hierarchy will come in handy as we design our prompting plans for our students. There are different prompting procedures that we can use with our students, and one is called least to most, and the other is called most to least. In the least to most prompting procedure, we start with the least restrictive prompts and we move towards more restrictive prompts along the way. This is great for when you're trying to determine the independence level of a student with a skill. If I start by pointing at something and the student doesn't respond to my directions, I might verbally give them some directions. And if not, I might model the directions until they are able to perform the skill. And that helps me to determine their ability level, or also is called a baseline sometimes. And in most to least prompting, we're going to use the most restrictive prompts, and work our way down to the other prompts that are less restrictive. Either way, using either form of prompting procedure, we want to make sure that the student is given the most opportunity to have independence in working on the skill. Let me give you an example of washing hands using least to most and then most to least. Now, it's important for me to point out that you don't need to use every prompt on the hierarchy when you're working with a student. You need to understand their skills and their abilities before you pick the prompts. So here we go. If I'm asking Tammy to wash her hands, I could say, Tammy, wash your hands, and then verbally say, Tammy, turn on the faucet. And then if Tammy does not turn on the faucet, I might resort to modeling next by saying, Tammy, turn on the faucet this way, while I model or demonstrate exactly how to turn on the faucet. And if that doesn't work, I will use a physical prompt and say, Tammy, turn on the faucet this way, and I will put my hand over her hand and guide her through the steps. But let's say Tammy turns on the faucet using verbal prompts. I won't proceed any further because I don't want to infringe on her independence. And next, with most to least, Tammy's hand washing example would look like this. I would say, Tammy, wash your hands, and I would use full physical guidance to help Tammy wash her hands to turn on the faucet. And then I would fade it or reduce the prompt to modeling if once Tammy feels comfortable with me doing the hand over hand physical guidance. And I would continue down until I had the least amount of prompt that she needed to get the hand washing complete. Errorless learning is a type of most to least prompting that is used in a classroom. The main goal of errorless learning is to ensure that the student gets the correct answer or performs a task correctly. And this is done through immediate prompting. So you would provide the directive, you would say something like, raise your hand, and then it is followed by a prompt immediately. So I would use a full physical prompt in this case and lift the hand of the student. And then I would say, great, you learned how to raise your hand. So I would provide the directive, I would give the student a prompt, and then I would reinforce their behavior. And reinforcement means you're trying to motivate the student to continue the behavior. So it might be praise or a high five that works on the student, but you would need to figure that out based on your student's needs and abilities. Now, errorless learning is when you want to teach someone without errors. You don't want to leave any room for them to make errors. So on this slide, I listed least to most prompting to remind us that we don't want to use least to most prompting when it comes to errorless learning, because least to most prompting allows for trial and error. And in this case, errors will interfere with the learning. And with errorless learning, we're doing a lot of prompting, but we do want to make sure that we reduce that prompt over time so the student does not become dependent on the prompt, and they will gain as much independence as possible. Now that you understand about prompting procedures, and prompting hierarchy, I want to point out some prompting errors that you will need to be aware of. Over-prompting is an error that you want to avoid. That's when you prompt way too much. And when you prompt way too much, that means that you're taking the independence away from the student, and the student might rely on you in order to perform the skill instead of relying on themselves. Another error is failing to provide reinforcement. Sometimes students don't want to learn or they're not inspired to learn. But if you find something that's motivating to them and you provide reinforcement after they show you that behavior you're teaching them, you're in a great position to have them want to learn more. And one error is failing to fade the prompts or reduce the prompts. Once again, that can lead to over-prompting and taking away independence. And finally, there's inadvertent prompting. You might be prompting a student without even realizing that you're doing it. For example, you might nod your head or point in the direction of a correct answer without even realizing that you're cueing the student. So keep these prompts in mind. We don't want to perform these prompting errors. How do you know that your prompt is effective? Well, you can collect some data. That can sound intimidating at times, but I encourage you to take a look at our data collection module. There are some great examples to show you how to collect data in much more detail. But for now, let me just provide you a simple method for data collection for prompting. Data collection is important to evaluate the success of prompts. And you know that your prompt is successful if the correct number is increasing over time of the behavior, or if it's effective if the independence is increasing. So if you take a look at this data collection sheet, you would include the target behavior, such as washing hands, and decide on what prompts you're going to use. Are you going to use physical, gestural? You decide which different prompts you'll use. And then you will have the date or the number of the trial. You'll write down the prompt level and then the correct and independent numbers. Take a look at this same data collection sheet with some data written in here. This is for washing hands. Take a look, I'll give you a moment, and you decide if the prompt is effective and think about why or why not the prompt is effective. Take a look. If you decided that the prompt is effective, I agree with you. Let's take a look at the reason why. If you notice the prompt level goes from most assistance to least assistance. And the correct number of times that the student was able to perform washing hands remained the same, even though the prompt was lessened. So that's a victory. And next, if you notice, the number of independent times that the student was able to wash hands increased over time. So the data collection shows that this was successful. But what if the data collection wasn't successful in proving that the prompt was working well? Well, we would use our prompt implementation plan, take a look at it, and we'd make some changes. Now that you know about prompting errors, and collecting data on prompts, I want to show you how to make an effective prompting implementation plan for your students in your classroom. And we'll base it on the hand washing example. The first step would be to choose the skill. So we're choosing to teach hand washing. And then we're going to break the skill into simple steps. So hand washing could be broken into things such as turning on the faucet, soaping up hands, rinsing hands, turning off the faucet, wiping hands dry, and things like that. So you'd break the skill into simple steps. And then you would choose a cue or directive. In this case, it might be very effective to say, wash your hands. And then it's important to identify who will be using the prompt with the student. Is it a teacher, the teacher's aide, another peer? You would decide that it could be one or more people, but that would be part of your plan that you would make a decision about. And next, you want to identify when to teach the skill. Will you teach the washing hands skill after recess, before eating, when you first enter the classroom in the beginning of the day? You could assist the student one time or many times throughout the day, but you decide when this plan is going to take place. And then you're going to select the prompts and the order you're going to use. Remember, in the prompting hierarchy, you don't need to use every prompt. You just use the ones that the students will relate to. And then you're going to decide a prompting procedure. Will the procedure be better off with a least to most procedure? Or will it be better with most to least? Or will you need errorless learning? And then you'll need to decide on mastery criterion. So will it be 80% mastery before you move on? 90%, 100%? You will make that decision. And then you will decide on the reinforcer. What is going to motivate that student to work hard in learning that skill? And then after that, you'll collect data on how the student is doing, and then you'll evaluate the data. Once again, we'll be looking at the number of correct, if that's improving over time. And we also want to find out if their independence is increasing over time. And if it's not, we want to make sure that we modify the plan to fit the student's needs. You can modify any part of this prompting implementation plan to make the prompting plan effective for your student. Before we close, I'd like to give you some takeaway points that are important when it comes to prompting. Let's review. It's important to add the prompt right after the initial direction is given. And remember, prompting is intended to increase independence. Although we're providing assistance to students, we want to make sure that we decrease that assistance so that they can perform that skill at the highest level of independence that they possibly can. And we know that prompting is working when the prompt is no longer needed. And that's a good thing. And we want to be aware of those prompting errors where we make students more dependent on us than providing them with independence. And finally, we want to evaluate the effectiveness of the prompts. We want to have a plan ahead of time, and then we want to evaluate that the plan is working. And if not, we want to change it so that we could help our student to the best of our ability. And as a final wrap up, I'd like to ask you this question. How will you incorporate prompting with your students? I'm sure you'll find many great ways to use it. And I want to thank you for listening. For more information, please take a visit to our website or send us an email, and the information is right here on the slide.